Welcome to the Stormwater Assessment Meeting. Kyle Stevens from Stantec Consulting Services will begin the presentation at 6:05. Welcome to the Stormwater Assessment Meeting. Kyle Stevens from Stantec Consulting Services will begin the presentation at 6:05. The presentation will be followed immediately by a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit any questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and opening the Q&A window. During the Q&A session, we'll direct each question to the appropriate party for a verbal response. Additionally, you can find general information and a list of frequently asked questions at www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater. Thank you for joining us for this evening's Stormwater Assessment Meeting. Kyle Stevens from Stantec Consulting Services is about to begin the presentation. The presentation will be followed immediately by a question and answer session. Please feel free to submit any questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and opening the Q&A window. During the Q&A session, I'll direct each question to the appropriate party for a verbal response. Kyle, feel free to begin when you're ready.
Perfect. Thank you, Jason. I'm happy to jump into it. What we've got tonight is I want to cover the results of a stormwater rate study that we've conducted for the City of Fort Lauderdale. And really, it's made up of several integrated investigations that follow one another. In this first slide, we'll be talking through all these this evening, but first step was the revenue requirements, which is fundamentally concerned with the dollars to run the system. How much on an annual basis do we need in order to sustainably run stormwater operations and make capital investments within the city? The next step we'll talk over is the cost allocation. So how do we look at parcels within the city and how they benefit from stormwater activities? And then the third is how do we set up a fee structure such that we can recover the needed monies to run the system in a sustainable and equitable way? The fourth item I'll cover today is the method of billing. Currently, stormwater charges are on the monthly utility bill along with water, sewer, and trash services. There is a recommendation here to potentially move it to the tax bill once a year in November. So I'll jump right into things. The first section is the revenue requirements. And there's a couple key things to talk about with revenue requirements. So in our financial modeling, what we've included for the purposes of this rate study is operations and maintenance expenses. In the current year we're in, those are about $11.5 million, and they are currently funded through the rate. Additionally, there's $4 million that goes toward investments in the community right now, mostly renewal and replacement type activities. But there is, as part of the study, there was additional projects that were brought into the fold, which are the master plan projects. These are 7 neighborhoods of critical importance that need significant generational investments in stormwater. And it's really a timing issue. So these are the first priority neighborhoods the city through this master planning process. So it's identified projects in most every watershed throughout the community. And so the plan is to start addressing needs on a priority basis. And the idea of this revenue sufficiency was to put all of these needs in here and then project the stormwater utility for the next 10 years as far as revenues and expenses to see what a sustainable picture looks like. And so how does that look? This next slide is a dashboard of the financial models that we created as part of the fee study. And in this first scenario, I've done what I'd like to refer to as a diagnostic view. What we've done is put the rate increase in for 2020, the year we're in, but then held revenues flat for the forecast period out through 2029. We've loaded in the expenditures and the capital investments that are necessary. And the real chart I want to key you in on is this middle one, the revenues versus expenditures. And this works identical to your own personal bank account. The orange is the cash coming out in each year. The black is the cash coming in. In this particular situation, you can see in almost every single year as we go forward, there's a gap between those two, the orange line being greater than the black line. That's an unsustainable situation. And one way to see that is the reserve balances of the fund, which are slightly positive, but then very quickly go in a negative direction, which can't necessarily happen, but this shows the negative trajectory. And so the next question that we would ask is, what would it take from a revenue adjustment standpoint to make this a sustainable paradigm going forward? In this particular slide, I've now adjusted the revenue. So in FY21, this is a 54% increase in the revenue stream. And each year forward, I put 3% in kind of as inflationary levels. And then in 2026, you can see a larger increase. Now, why are these increases hitting here in 21 and 26? That's due to the capital funding. So as I mentioned, one of the key components that was included in the study was those large generational stormwater investments. Say between 20 and 21 here represent roughly $200 million. In 2026, a very similar amount adjusted for inflation. And so that's the revenue sufficiency. The main takeaway is the system definitely needs more revenue in order to sustain operations and investments within the community on a go-forward basis for the next 10 years. So next, I'd like to jump into the cost allocation. And on cost allocation, there's a number of ways that communities throughout Florida and the United States will measure the stormwater benefit that parcels receive. And so I've ordered these on the left from top to bottom, and they kind of move toward least equitable to most equitable. Some very rudimentary stormwater systems will actually use taxable value. They'll use the general fund to pay for stormwater. I would argue there's not a high relation between the value of a parcel and how much stormwater it can generate or the benefit it gets from stormwater, but there are some that do it. Dwelling units, gross area, pervious area, and impervious area are much more common metrics for assessing stormwater benefit. But in the case of Fort Lauderdale, and in the case of any community really, we have to customize these fees to fit the underlying characteristics and dynamics of providing service in the area. And so these are just some of the pictures from Fort Lauderdale. And one of the key things that was revealed to us as we talked with staff that knows the system best or works on the system is that Fort Lauderdale is really dealing with dual threats. One is the precipitation-driven events when we have rainfall, but secondarily, we also have tidal influences. And especially when we have king tides, it can impair the stormwater system. It can also back up the stormwater system and flow into streets. And so as part of the cost allocation, we brought a new metric to the table, which is trip generation rates. And these are used in governments for other types of assessments. But for stormwater in Fort Lauderdale, this made a heck of a lot of sense because most of the activity that's happening in stormwater services is taking place first and foremost in the street. So keeping streets clear and passable so people can use them during precipitation events, so emergency vehicles can pass, one of the key considerations. Now, what are trip generation rates? It's really a mechanism by which we can compare how different land uses utilize and benefit from a free and passable street. And so in this example, I've just put 3 different land use types. I've got a single family home, and we use the IT trip generation rate. It's an industry standard manual that has observational data about different land uses and the amount of trips they generate on a daily average. And so single family homes, that's roughly 9.44 trips per day. But if we look at something like a gas station, it's about 845 trips per day on 1,000 square feet. A supermarket's 106 per 1,000 square feet. And there's about 63 different types of land uses that I've connected to ITE trip generation rates within the entirety of the service area for Fort Lauderdale. So it gives us a basis to compare parcels on this metric. Now, this was presented to the commission in what the direction the commission gave to us was to look at a hybrid approach, which took into account the fact that there is currently a stormwater fee structure in place that's associated with impervious area. That was then added to by a trip generation structure. I'll talk about that in a second, but one of the key components and questions that comes up is if you have a bifurcated assessment methodology, you need to figure out how to recover how much revenue on each side of the equation. And so in order to do that, we performed a cost of service analysis, looking at two of the key service metrics that stormwater services provide. So that's the quality of runoff. So there's a lot of activities associated with collecting trash in the roadway and catch basins in order to prevent those from entering the natural environment, and also quantity related activities dealing with the runoff and the gallons that we need to deliver to receiving bodies. And so this is just a snapshot of that cost of service process. This shows each individual department in stormwater, the budget amount, and then the colors off to the right are indicative of the amount of either quality or quantity related activities happening there. When we look at the system in total, it's about 20% on the quality side, 80% on the quantity side. And so we use that 80-20 split, 20% connected to trips and quality, what's going on in the roadway, 80% on the current impervious area based rates to go forward and create an assessment methodology. And so I'll move into the actual fee structure now, and I'm going to take some time to go through it as it connects and relates to individual property types. But this first diagram is really explaining how an individual property gets built. So I'll take the top first. In the fiscal year 2021, we allocated fully about $31.3 million as part of the study. 80%, as I mentioned, goes to the current structure, about 25.1. And then within the current structure, there's three different customer classifications. Single family homes, they are billed on a per dwelling unit basis. So the dwelling units are what allows the fee to scale. If it is a improved structure that's not a single family home, or a parcel with structures that's improved, that's not single family, it would fall into the improved category. And then finally, the vacant category with nothing on it. And these two categories are billed based on the gross square footage of the parcel, as given by the Broward County property appraiser. I've included over here the three rates that are associated with that, the per dwelling unit and the per acreage fees associated with the bottom two categories. And then finally, on the trip structure, there's the 20% of cost that comes down. When we look at the overall service area, that 6.2 turns to about $4.19 per trip. So when you look at the overall trips generated on an average day in the entire area, we then look on a per parcel basis to try to understand the trip generation that I just talked about a second ago, the rate at which trips are generated by the unique characteristics of the parcel. So how big are the buildings, if it's on a per 1,000 square foot basis, or how many dwelling units are there if it's a residential type property. And then finally, those two blend together to create the final assessment. And so I'll run through what this looks like for various customer classes. Tonight's meeting was meant to emphasize some of the condo dynamics, so I'll actually go into pretty good detail on how those fees were created. So for a single family home, it's an example of a one dwelling unit structure. The current fee on an annual basis is about $168. As I mentioned, they pay that monthly right now. The calculated rates, again, remembering that we need additional revenue, and that's been included in this analysis, is $258.26, the change of $90.26 over the entire year. Now, how does that compare? One of the things whenever we're doing a rate study that comes up is how do we compare to our neighbors? So as part of the study, we put together some of the largest stormwater utilities in Florida and what they charge their single family homes as of this year. You can see currently Fort Lauderdale in the middle of the pack at $14, and then the updated rate off to the right. A couple key things, though, whenever we're doing these surveys that I like to mention is one, there really is a key correlation when we start to look on the right side of the screen of communities that are abutting waterways. And when you are close to the water and you have to deal with that in your stormwater fund, it typically costs more money. Many of these communities off to the right we will see are very much coastal communities dealing with the same pressures that Fort Lauderdale sees. Additionally, from just an overall industry perspective, we're seeing a lot of pressure on these fees, and they're increasing in each of these communities often on an annual basis or much like Fort Lauderdale, they'll go along for a couple of years and then move it up to a new level to deal with the regulatory pressures and capital investment needs. So with regards to condos, I mentioned I'd go into some pretty good detail. I'm going to slow down on this particular slide before I talk about the customer impact I have next up. This is an example of a condo parcel and what we went through in order to allocate the cost according to the stormwater methodology that's been set forth tonight. This is a building that's about 216,000 square foot lot with 266 living units. So the first part of it is really based on the overall gross area of the parcel that take that 216, but then need to convert it to acreage using the acreage conversion factor of 43,560 feet, which gives us about 4.96 acres. We then multiply that by the fee per acre for a Category 2 improved parcel. And that comes up with, for the entire parcel, a fee on an annual basis of $11,281.77. Now, to get to a condo unit, which this assessment is intended to go to the actual owners of units in a condo, as opposed to the overall HOA like it is right now for most condos, because they have one meter and one utility account. To get to the individual basis, what we do is we look at the individual living square footage of a condo. I've given an example out of this building that's about 958 square feet. And we compare that to the full living square foot of the building to come up with a portion of the overall living square foot. In this case, it's 0.004, which allows us to multiply these two together to come up with a common area cost that's attributable to the unit. And in this case, that's about 5002 for this exact building. Really important key here is that depending on the exact size of the unit, that percentage can change, and the overall fee that each unit will see, even in one building, may differ slightly. And from one building to the next, may differ quite a bit given the different development characteristics of condo buildings throughout the community. Now, on the bottom side of this screen, I've included the trip generation base rates. And what we've got there is essentially looking at it on a per dwelling unit basis. And so the ITE trip generation manual identifies condo units as having 4.45 trips per unit. The fee I mentioned per trip as part of the assessment is $419. That gives us $1865. And so we take the two together, the assessment for this particular example would come out to $68.67. And so it just kind of works you through the algebra and the math of how this assessment applies and why, when you may look at different fees in the same building, you might see some different or some variation between fees. If I go to my next example, this is a Midrise example. Its fee currently is about $42.55 on a per unit basis. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't necessarily come on an individual basis right now. Most condominiums, it's coming on a centralized utility account and then being spread out to the units on an HOA or an association type fee. The new updated assessment, $75.76 in this case, that's a change, $33.21. Now, if we move to a couple different examples, this is an institutional example. Current fee is $1428.71. The calculated fee under this assessment would be $2526.32 for a change of $1,097.61 over the entire year. And my last example is a commercial example. And in this particular example, the trip generation rates down here in this bar really drive a lot of the particular assessment that's being generated here. And so the current bill is $3,208.30. But this particular parcel benefits a lot from trip generation rates. It's a very big building. And so the calculated rate for this one is $22,584.61. It's a change of $19,376.31 for the entire year. Now, the final element I want to talk through tonight is the method of billing. There are really two ways to do it. Fort Lauderdale currently uses the utility billing method, meaning that bills for stormwater services come on the monthly bill with water, sewer, and trash. The other way to do it that's being recommended as part of this study is a non-ad valorem assessment. That shows up on the bottom portion of a property owner's tax bill. And there are a number of benefits associated with that, which is why it's being recommended. And that's because typically it leads to greater accuracy. So it's a lot easier to manage a direct relationship between the assessment if you can send the bills directly to a parcel instead of to utility billing accounts, with oftentimes have one-to-many parcel relationships. It also leads to higher collection rates and lower administrative costs. It's also easier to update. And so as part of this recommendation, what would happen is starting in mid-October, the stormwater utility billing would start to come off the bill, depending on exactly what billing cycle you're on. And then it would transfer over to the tax bill on November 1st for next year for all parcels. This just shows an example from around the state of the utilities and what collection method they're using. And it's really a mixed picture. You'll see some on the utility billing shown in the green dots to the right, and others in the orange triangle using the assessment methodology. I can tell you each and every year there's a number of utilities that are moving toward the assessment methodology, and they're trying to capture some of those benefits that we just talked about with the recommendation that Fort Lauderdale is looking at this year. As part of the study as well, one of the things that has been put up on the city's website is a Stormwater Fee Finder. This is a screenshot of it. And if you have any questions on your exact parcel in the community or in the service area, you can use this to go directly to that. And a pop-up will come up when you click on your parcel, and it'll show you the exact customer class, the gross area, trip generation rate, and the annual assessment for next year related to this year's stormwater study and proposed rate structure. And so with that, Jason, I will conclude my presentation and turn it back over to you for any questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Kyle. For anyone who may have joined late, you can submit your questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. All right, so we'll jump into the first question here. For a condo building, does the stormwater monthly charge on the water and sewer bill go away beginning in 2021?
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. And I think I went over that in a slide a second ago. And so there's going to be this transitional period. When we hit mid-October, it will begin to transition off of the utility billing basis, and that will disappear. And then it will show up on the tax bill on November 1st as a non-ad valorem assessment.
Excellent, thank you. The next question is, does the annual rate or non-ad valorem charge on our property tax bill significantly increase in a particular year? I remember hearing something about a 54% increase.
Yeah, it's a great question. And so the assessment that's been calculated in the rates that I just went through in bill impact include a 54% revenue increase in 2021. And so they include this revenue increase that I talked about in the revenue sufficiency study. And that's the only rate that's up for approval for the commission this year. There are additional forecasted or projected increases, but it would be up to the city commission's discretion and each year going forward to approve those.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is, what are some examples of things the city has done to improve its stormwater infrastructure and address flooding concerns? Rares, are you able to take that?
Sure. So I think, like I mentioned before, we do have an ongoing CIP program that we construct approximately $3 to $4 million worth of smaller projects every year. In addition, we do about $1.3 million worth of work in maintaining the infrastructure for the sustainability division. So basically, when the pipe is broken or your catch basin is not working, or even if it's a small little flooding concern in front of a house, we address those. And we do have some big projects going on right now, and about 2 more about to kick in the beginning of next year. We have the River Oaks Preserve. That's a major project. We've been building seawalls. We just finished the Isle of Palm seawall. That was a $3 million project. We have the Cordova Road seawall that's under construction. So on a given year, again, probably between $3 to $6 million worth of work that we do to upkeep the infrastructure and install new infrastructure.
Perfect, thank you. Additionally, we have a list of improvements that have been made listed on the frequently asked questions on the city website. We'll provide the address for that shortly. The next question is non-ad valorem paid in arrears like taxes, or is the charge for the next year? If it's in arrears, am I paying double? Kyle?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me be clear on this. The stormwater assessment that has been proposed and talked about this evening would only cover the expenses for stormwater for fiscal year 2021, which starts on October 1st of this year.
Perfect. So they will not be paying in arrears. Thank you.
No.
The next question is, why does Fort Lauderdale charge a stormwater fee? Kyle, do you mind answering?
Yeah, absolutely. So Fort Lauderdale is not unique in charging a stormwater fee. In fact, the state of Florida has over 180 stormwater utilities, more than any other state in the union. And the reason that cities do that is because it's a way to programmatically evaluate and sustain ongoing stormwater operations and making capital investments within the city to meet federal regulatory guidelines, as well as level of service standards that they need to provide in order to prevent flooding, protect private property, keep the streets clear and passable, some of those benefits that I talked about earlier.
Perfect. Thank you. The next one is, did you get input from residents on the proposed new stormwater structure?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, and I probably should step back. This process actually started in 2016. So it's been going on for a number of years to get to the point at which we're at today. And throughout that process, there has been numerous commission presentations at working sessions, as well as a number of different meetings with community organizations, including the civic associations, as well as one-off meetings as the study has progressed and moved toward recommendations.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, it looks like all questions have been addressed at this time. Oh, there we go, we had a couple come through. The next one up is the standard of assessment as presented focuses on high and mid-rise condo towers. Why was there not a category for townhouses, which generally have development characteristics that contribute to management of runoff instead of, I'm sorry, I don't know what the last part is, but essentially, why did we not have a category for townhouses?
So I don't think there's, in this particular assessment, unique categories for each land type. Really what I've tried to show today as we walk through the customer impact is how the fee tries to evaluate on a parcel by parcel basis the unique benefits conferred by the stormwater activities that the city undertakes.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so the next question relates to a specific area. So why do we still have so much flooding in my neighborhood? They haven't seen work done there. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to respond directly to that, and if you'll send me your address, we can go ahead and provide you with a better response geared directly to your neighborhood. The next question is, the last slide of Kyle's presentation, to identify our condo building or my individual condo unit, where do I find this?
So this particular one is going to be, I put a detailed link down here that will give you this presentation is actually up online. The best way to find it, though, is to go to fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater. About midway through the page, it will have the GIS viewer where you can click on it, type in your address, and it will begin to populate addresses that match the criteria you're putting in, allowing you to zoom to an individual parcel and then pull up the assessment information. Perfect.
Thank you, Kyle. All right, excellent. So I do have the address, whereas I will provide that to you a little later. All right, so it looks like at this time we do not have any other questions. Oh, no, there we go. Will the Fort Lauderdale water rates be increased?
So this particular study we're looking at today is really concerned with just the stormwater activities that the city would be undergoing in the operations and maintenance of those structures. The city undertakes a number of planning processes separately to this study to look at water rates on an annual basis.
Perfect. Thank you, Kyle. Okay, so it does look like all questions have been addressed at this time. We do want to thank you for participating in this meeting, in this evening's meeting. No, you know what? We've got another one. So increased property taxes is around 19% in a year where the economy is terrible. How can we deal with that? And so, Kyle, I'll take this one really quick.
Okay.
And jump in where you feel necessary. But this, as Kyle brought up earlier, this study began years ago, and it just now is coming to fruition, and they've just made the recommendations to commission within the past year. And I don't think anybody was anticipating what we were going to be dealing with this year. That being said, commission is still doing one last public hearing on this item on September 14th, where you can come and share your opinions. Is there anything you want to add to that, Kyle?
The only thing I would add, Jason, and it's just a very minute point, the Stormwater Enterprise Fund is actually dedicated just for stormwater activities and completely separate from the other taxes that are levied. So the question related to taxes, I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you so much. All right, so, and we do have one additional question that regarding who can be contacted regarding water rate increases, and I will provide that information. Next question is, why don't you show a calculation comparing what condo unit owners together will pay versus what the condo pays? It is significant.
The condo owner, well, so and the point being that the condo payers on a per unit basis, the property owners are the ones that will be receiving the assessment. And so all of the bill calculations that I went through today went to the actual property owners, and that's where the rubber meets the road, if you will. And so that's where I wanted to show that example and why we didn't show it in an aggregate basis. But I did make the division to show the comparison between what it looks like on a per unit basis as charged today. So I tried to do that from taking the current fee to a per unit basis.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. The next question is, before September 14th, will there be an online meeting? And so the answer to that is there will be two other online presentations, one for single-family homes, one for commercial properties, but that will be the next meeting where the commission will discuss this topic. All right, so it looks like all the questions have been addressed. I'll give it another minute to see if we have anything else come through.
Jason, one of the residents is asking about online for any other taxes. I don't believe that there are online meetings or any other meetings for, with the exception of the budget hearings that will take place. But Laura can definitely chime in on that.
Yeah, thanks, Anisha. Yeah, this is Laura Reese. And there is, so depending on what the question really means, there's a commission meeting. It's not to discuss stormwater fees, but there will be a virtual commission meeting on September 1st. And then we have our first public hearing on the budget on September 3rd at 5:01, and that's also virtual. So those two meetings will both happen before the 14th, if that helps at all.
Perfect. Thank you, Laura.
I think we should also clarify that the city is not proposing a tax increase or a millage rate increase this fiscal year.
I'm sorry, one more time, Shannon, can you repeat that? You broke up for me.
That this city is not proposing a tax or millage rate increase for next fiscal year. The proposed rate is 4.1193, which is the same as this current fiscal year.
Got it. Perfect. Thank you. All right, excellent. So it looks like all questions have been addressed at this time. We do want to thank you for participating in this evening's meeting. Please feel free to log on to www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater for additional information. Should you think of any additional questions, please feel free to submit them at lauderserve.fortlauderdale.gov using the call center stormwater assessment issue type. In case you joined us late, we will be hosting additional informational meetings on the proposed stormwater assessment. Please visit www.fortlauderdale.gov/stormwater for details. Thank you all again.
Thank you.